Now, billionaire Jeffrey Epstein was arrested over the weekend in New York City involving sex trafficking charges. Now, one law enforcement official told the Associated Press that the case deals with allegations that Epstein had paid numerous underage girls for massages and molested them at his homes in Florida and New York. So now, earlier, Epstein had actually been brought to court and actually sentenced in Florida. However, they're taking another crack at it because, well, now the Southern District of New York is looking at these charges again. And the reason that they're doing that, as I'm going to explain here, has to do with, first of all, who actually made this deal and why. So now, one of the charges involved paying a girl as young as 14 for sex, which is gross. Super, super gross. Now, Epstein, whose friends have included President Trump and former President Bill Clinton, as well as Great Britain's Prince Andrew, was arrested on Saturday at an airport near New York City after his private jet touched down from France. Now, a task force of federal agents and New York City police officers met the plane at Teterboro Airport and took Epstein into custody. Now, he has not been released. He's still currently being held without bail. Why? Because he's a flight risk. Former federal prosecutor David Weinstein said that there's almost no chance Epstein will allowed to go home after the hearing. He said, quote, "The government is clearly seeking to have him detained. The guy is a millionaire or billionaire. He has unrestrained assets. If they let him out on bond, he may take off, go to a jurisdiction where they don't have extradition, and they may never get him back." So now that makes a lot of sense that they would deem him a flight risk. He has, again, all of those assets and definitely a motive to skip the country. So Southern District of New York here is actually doing a really smart thing by denying him bail. Now, it's not the first time, by the way, Epstein has gotten in trouble for this. Epstein's arrest, first reported by the Daily Beast, came amid increased scrutiny of the 2008 non-prosecution deal that allowed Epstein to plead guilty to lesser state charges instead of federal charges, which, by the way, that's what they're revisiting. Now, they can't revisit the Florida state case because that would violate double jeopardy. But since this happened in New York, now the federal government can now go after him with federal charges related to what happened in New York. Now, why did they let Epstein go with a plea deal the first time? Well, I think it's very obvious. He's rich. He's rich. Now, of course, this is under scrutiny because he got off so lightly for basically doing the same thing, right? Molesting underage girls for money because of who authorized that deal. And that deal was overseen by former Miami U.S. Attorney and current Trump Labor Secretary, Alexander Acosta. That is why currently Acosta is being basically pressured to resign from the Trump administration. Who knew that it would be Epstein that could bring down Alexander Acosta? Now, in it, Epstein avoided a life sentence and served 13 months in jail after pleading guilty to Florida charges of soliciting and procuring a person under the age of 18 for prostitution. Now, it also required he reach financial settlements with dozens of victims and register as a sex offender, which, by the way, for a billionaire, pretty easy for him to do. So he got off basically with a slap on the wrist. Now, the deal is being challenged in Florida federal court. U.S. District Judge Kenneth Mara of Florida ruled earlier this year that Epstein's victims should have been consulted under federal law about that deal, and now is weighing to whether or not he should be able to invalidate that deal. There are no double jeopardy implications because Epstein's guilty plea involved only state crimes, while the current case involves federal law, as I explained earlier. Now, this is the details of the case. According to court records, authorities say that at least 40 underage girls were brought into Epstein's Palm Beach mansion for what turned into sexual encounters after female fixers looked for suitable girls locally and in Eastern Europe and other parts of the world. So this is global. This is a global sex trafficking ring. Some of the girls were allegedly brought to Epstein's homes in New York City, New Mexico, and a private Caribbean island, according to court documents. So now the Epstein is saying, "Oh no, I'm not guilty of any of this." Yeah, okay, man. Now he's gross, he's a predator, but he's a very wealthy predator, and so of course, previously he really didn't have to face all that much justice. And after he was done, 13 months in jail, he can go back to continuing to, victimize young women, young girls. And you can thank Alexander Acosta. Now, what's even more interesting is if they do decide to go forward with a federal case, then it could lead to other interesting side effects, not just actually getting justice for what Epstein had done, basically pimping out preteen or young teen girls. But okay, so this could lead to some very interesting side effects, right? In an interview Sunday morning on MSNBC, Miami Herald scribe Julie Brown said that this case could end up being explosive. How so? Needless to say, she said, these are very powerful people, and I think that they're sweating a little bit, especially today. We don't know how deep this went, how far-reaching it went in government, but there have been a lot of names that I could see in these message pads listing clients on a regular basis as part of the evidence. These message pads where they could call and leave Epstein messages, such as, "I'm at this hotel. Why do you do that unless you're expecting him to send you a girl to visit you at your hotel?" So now that is very important. So it's not just about what Epstein had done, but how wide-reaching his possible client base was and how much it was in government. I mean, this is some crazy stuff. If there are people in government who had actually used this service, who had sexual relations with these underage girls, who hooked up with Jeffrey Epstein to be able to do so, that's huge. Now, she said, "We'll have to wait and see whether Epstein is going to name names to lower his culpability." And two of Epstein's very high-profile friends happen to be Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. Yikes. Now, for Trump, they went to dinner parties at each other's houses. Trump was also on his plane, probably not as much as other people because, Trump had his own plane, but they had a lot of social relationships. And the other interesting thing is Trump had a modeling agency, and Epstein also had a stake in the modeling agency, which they suspect he used to bring in underage girls from overseas. There's a comment in one of the court files where Epstein is quoted as saying, "I want to set up my modeling agency the same way Trump set up his modeling agency," taking a lot of course, foreign girls. I don't know what that means, but it's curious that he was trying to do something similar to Trump. So that was Brown. Now, look, I'm not saying Trump did anything illegal that we know of. Just knowing Epstein doesn't necessarily make you a criminal. That said, Donald Trump has just been accused of another rape. And there's also the question, of course, is if Trump, even if he didn't do anything, which we don't know, and it is very possible, there's also the question if Trump knew any of this was going on. If he did, could he not be an accessory to this? So I can understand why certain people might be nervous about this, especially if Epstein tries to talk to lower his sentence. That's, of course, I'm going a little bit ahead because, we don't know if they're actually going to revisit this case using federal law instead. I hope so, because at the end of the day, I want justice for these victims. But it also is pretty interesting who might be a little bit nervous now for this news. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.